shortly.
Good morning, and thank you once again for joining us for this webinar. Look, this weekend, and in particular on Sunday, it marks International UN World Soils Day. I think it's a timely reminder to us of the importance of healthy soils and indeed good soil fertility to support both on-farm economic and environmental sustainability. We all know that healthy soils are key to the efficient use of soil nutrients, or nutrient use efficiency as it's commonly known today. But healthy soils are also fundamental to the production of food in an environmental and sustainable way. So look, this morning we're joined by Teagasc soils expert David Wall, and David is going to talk to us about all things soils, but in particular discuss feed to yield and nutrient use efficiency when it comes to grassland management. Importantly, he'll also provide timely fertiliser planning tips, which will both save us money and reduce environmental impact. As always, your questions matter, and we'd ask you to send your questions into us by email to hello@glanbiaconnect.com, or look, alternatively, you can send us a text at 086 180 3947. So David, thank you for taking the time to join us in the webinar. You're welcome, and we now look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the kind introduction. Good morning, everybody, and I'm going to take you through, as Thomas has said, through a presentation about, I suppose, saving money and good soil nutrition, which is key for the year ahead, but also in terms of the long term, in terms of the overall farm sustainability angle. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Sorry, no. Okay, so in terms of a picture, just to get us into this, what's the national soil fertility picture on dairy farms in terms of pH, P and K at a national level? If we look at the pH figure, we have a big proportion of soils there heading in the right direction. So our target there is 6.2 or above. And if we look at it, we have approximately 70% of the soils in the country are heading that direction. So that's a fairly good picture overall in terms of soil pH, it being the foundation of soil fertility and the application of lime on our acid soils here in Ireland. If we look at the P and K type picture, there's a lot done and a lot more to do, I would say, overall nationally. So we have approximately 25% of the soils at the optimum index. However, there's another 24% that are in the high category. Obviously, there's an opportunity there in 2022 to exploit some of the high nutrients in those very high P soils, help to draw them down a little bit, which will be better, I suppose, for the environment and water quality, but also good for your production. In terms of potash, Irish soils are naturally high in potash, and it's not surprising there that we have over 50% there at optimum K levels or potash levels. However, there is soils there, a growing number of soils at index 2, and that might be akin to some of the silage areas where there's a big offtake of potash. So it's something to look at in the year ahead. And I suppose for the P and K, it might be somewhere that you would think about in terms of directing or targeting your slurry applications for the year ahead. Think about, I suppose, the year ahead. High fertiliser prices, potential some limitations in terms of supply, so getting your hands on what you need this year could be a little bit more difficult. We hope as the year would go on that things would rightify themselves. However, I suppose if we think about this situation has happened in the past and what can we learn from that? So in 2007, 8 and 9 here, we had the introduction of nitrates, I suppose, and regulation on fertiliser, but we also had some of the highest fertiliser prices for the last 2 decades at that time in 2008 and 2009. And I suppose many farmers left out the compound fertiliser on the back of that. They preferentially bought nitrogen because phosphorus in particular was really, really expensive. And what knock-on effect did that have? I suppose K or potash suffered where there was no phosphorus going out in compounds, and soil fertility actually declined and stayed low for between 2010 and 2015. And it's only since 2015 did we start to recover soil fertility, and overall we're only at about 21% nationally. So again, we don't want to repeat that. There's a lot of hard work after going in here in the last 5 or 6 years to build soil fertility, build this picture. We don't want this to start dropping off into the early 2020s because of this year. So what I would say to you there this year is direct the slurry to where it needs to go, and at least hold or maintain soil fertility for 2022. We mightn't be building because it's expensive, but we don't want to go backwards. Why build soil fertility at all? And I suppose that's a question that many farmers ask, many advisors ask. You know, can we not just feed the system year in, year out and overcome the issue with soil fertility? And I suppose that doesn't work. In the soil system, you have to feed the soil to feed the crop. And in that system there, an index 3 or an index 4 soil is going to have a much higher yield potential every year, year in, year out. So again, operating at index 1 or 2, there is an opportunity cost in terms of production there. If we look at the figure here, where we look at in the dark green and the red index 3, which is the target, and index 4, you can see the relative nitrogen fertilizer use efficiency. So the recovery of nitrogen fertilizer is set there at 100%. Right? If we operate at index 1 or 2, the yellow or the light green bar here, we're now operating at around 85%. So with that, up to 15% of the nitrogen that we're putting into the system is not utilised by operating at an index 1 or 2. That's costing money, and in a year like we're facing into this year, that's going to be incredibly expensive if you're putting on more fertiliser to make up for that lost uptake and lost production. If we think about other reasons, we get increased persistence of the new reseeds that you're putting in, the ryegrass and the clover, more resilient grass growth in terms of swings in weather, either droughts or very wet springs. We get better response in terms of nitrogen that we put on there. And ultimately, we're going to get increased environmental sustainability, lower emissions, lower losses to water, and your back pocket is going to respond positively in terms of long-term profitability as well. Soil pH is probably the first step there on the road to building soil fertility. The target there is to get the pH up to 6.3 or above, if you have, especially if you have clover in the sward. And if we look at the figure here from 6 dairy farms here in this figure, these are the paddocks. Each one of these symbols represents a pH level at the paddock and the grass yield. And we can see here the pH levels, as I've said in the previous slide, we need to get up to about 6.3, this sweet spot here. And what happens when we do that? So at a pH of 6.3 or above, we increase the yield, and you can see here these paddocks on average are doing around 12.5 tons, up to 13 tons there when we get up to that pH. And what does that mean in terms of total production? If we're operating with acid soils, the tonnage is going to be lower, you're going to grow less grass. And on these paddocks, on these real farms, we're growing 4 to 5 additional tons by just putting out lime. These farmers didn't change their strategy in terms of nitrogen. They didn't change their other parameters in soil fertility. Just by getting the pH up from this very acid down in the 5.5 range, right up to 6.3 and above, you're maximizing your recovery of nutrients. And I suppose you all have acid there for washing the tank, washing your plant in the dairy. You're not putting your ungloved hand into that acid because it'll burn you. It's the very same deal there where you're trying to get a delicate reseed going into acid conditions. It's going to burn the roots off it. So again, biology doesn't like acid, and neither does grass. Soil testing will give you the values that you're at. So consult your soil test. Remember, anybody that's in derogation, you have soil test results there. They're not just for the Department of Agriculture, they're yours, you've paid for them. So look at them, get the pH right, and the soil test will also give you the recommendation of how much lime you need. In terms of lime applications and other benefits, we're hearing in the media in terms of agriculture and greenhouse gases all the time. Lime can be a key factor to reducing greenhouse gas emissions on Irish farms. This is some research hot off the press, which we've conducted, where we had different range of soil pH across soils, and we looked at the greenhouse gas emissions coming out of these soils, in this case nitrous oxide. The lime soils had reduced nitrous oxide emissions by up to about 39%. So what I would say there, between 6.2 and 6.9, we can get 25 to 40% reduction there easily by just applying lime. We got increased nitrogen uptake, so there was less nitrogen hanging around in the soil there to be lost, either up or down to the water. And another added benefit there is we got increased carbon sequestration in these soils where there were limes. So the rooting depth, much more rooting, much more carbon moving into the soil. And ultimately, we would hope that farmers will be paid for the carbon they're storing in their soils in the future. And again, getting ahead of the game by getting your soils limed and ready to go would be a good added benefit. If we bring all this together then, good soil fertility, it drives nitrogen recovery. Again, I'm using data here collected from 21 dairy farms in our area here in the southeast and along the south. 446 fields were measured over 2 years. We measured the soil fertility, we measured the grass growth, and we measured the nitrogen that was taken up by that grass. And what I'm showing here is where soil pH, P and K are very low, so low overall soil fertility here in the red dot, we basically had about 30% nitrogen recovery. So very low levels of total nitrogen fertilizer recovery. Where we build pH and P and K, and ultimately we have everything optimized here in this green dot up here. You can see there we're getting an additional 30% increase in nitrogen use efficiency without changing nitrogen fertilizer, without changing anything else we do on the farm. So again, you're getting a good return on investment by building soil fertility, less nitrogen available for loss. So good for the environment, good for your production, and good for your profitability. If we move into then some tips for the year ahead in terms of what are you going to do in the spring in terms of getting slurry, getting nitrogen out in the spring to grow that grass to feed the cows as they calve down and are turned out. Some things that we must remember there, the spring has lower overall rates of grass growth, so we must tailor our nitrogen or our inputs to grass growth, and we can use the analogy of feed to yield. If we think about feeding the crop that we're trying to grow or the grass that we're trying to grow according to the yield potential of that, it's the same thing as the cows in the dairy parlour. You know, you're not going to feed them extra concentrate if they're gone beyond their milk production peak and milk production is beginning to fall. You know, and grass is good. So again, why would we do it with grass in early January and February if there's not potential there across the farm? So high variability between years, as you know, some years are wet, some years are dry, so has to be tailored according to the year. Soil temperature is key here. Grass growth only commences when soil temperature goes above 5.5 degrees and stays there for a long duration. So when I say a long duration, 3 or 4 days before the grass will kick in at that temperature. So where you're getting frost at night and soil temperature are jumping up and down over the course of a week, it's probably not good conditions for consistent growth and you might hold off for a week or so. Light is another factor. As the spring opens up, and the day length gets longer, there's much more potential for growth to kick in under those conditions. So here I'm showing a grass growth curve from pasture base. You'll have these for your own farm, so you can consult these after the webinar here or in the spring when you're beginning to plan. See what you did last year, see how the growth went. If we look here in terms of January and early February, we have less than 10 kilograms of growth during that period, consistently year on year. So again, with less than 10 kilograms of growth, we have very low response to nitrogen fertilizer. So again, if in doubt, maybe leave it in the bag, hold off there. And if you're wanting to start off with something on a part of the farm, maybe slurry is the best thing to use. If we think about the total nitrogen uptake up to the 1st of March here, again, using the averages there, 5-year average, it was 14 kilograms, and using the best year in terms of 19 or 20, it was 16 kilograms. So it stands to reason that we should tailor our application rates according to what's going to be uptaken in that period, right? So apply in on drier soils first. Better response where moderate grass covers are. So if the paddock is very bare, it's the last one you grazed, it's not going to respond as well as ones that have a better cover. Utilize some slurry first, but keep the application rates low. Remember, slurry is incredibly valuable this year. Hold the chemical nitrogen fertilizer till conditions you're sure that they're better, and then follow on with the remaining soils or fields when conditions allow. Right? Just a piece of information there. Avoid nutrient applications on cold, wet soils. This shows the response there in terms of soil temperature versus apparent nitrogen recovery. So nitrogen recovery from the fertilizer. And as you can see there, it takes probably consistently 6-7 degrees before you're getting 25% of your fertilizer taken up. As the temperature increases, there's a much higher uptake. So again, if we're down in this territory, 5-6 degrees, be very careful. And also, if soils are wet, we don't want to do too much damage in terms of compaction. That's going to have another effect in terms of future trafficability with the cows. They'll do more damage, but also there, under those conditions, it's going to have a longer lasting effect on the production potential of the farm. Okay. What is the NPK value of slurry? So, as I've said, slurry is incredibly valuable this year. If we think about slurry spread either in the spring or in the summer, that has an effect on the nitrogen, but also what method we use. If we think about splash plated slurry, and we think about spreading that in the spring, that's worth a bag of 6,532. So 1,000 gallons of cattle slurry, if you were to go down to the co-op and buy it, it's worth a bag of 6,532 and worth about €37 this year. If we think about that same slurry spread with a splash plate, spread in the summer when the sun is splitting the stones, there's potential for the sun and the warm weather to bake off that nitrogen. We're reducing our nitrogen value by half. So now we're spreading a bag of 3,532. However, if we're using low emission slurry spreading, we can recover and maintain that nitrogen. Now the spring applied slurry increases its nitrogen value by 50%. It's worth a bag of 9,532 and worth a lot more money. It's worth €40. And the same in the summer. If there's slurry held over till the summer after first cut silage, for example, it's much better in terms of its nitrogen value when it's spread by low emission slurry spreading. Finally then, putting all this into practice, what are some key performance indicators for nutrient efficiency for getting this right? We've taken the example here of Donald Kavanagh's farm in County Wicklow. Donald, many will know, is a dairy farmer, relatively highly stocked. You can see there in the picture, he's employed the low emission slurry spreading technique. He has trail and shoe there on the tanker. If we think about Donald's soil fertility situation on the farm, it's very good. He's been working on this and talking with him yesterday. He's still working on lime and has more lime to spread in 2022, which he's going to do. But overall there, you know, 58%, 60% of the soils are high in pH. He has good soil P fertility. He also noted there that there's 41% very high in phosphorus that he's going to save on this year and not apply compound fertilizer or slurry on those soils. And then his potash, he's looking after that as well, especially on his silage fields. If we think about the nutrient inputs on the soil, on the farm, he's less reliant on chemical fertilizer rates because his soil fertility has come up. He's tested his slurry, so he knows what he's spreading, and he's adopted the low emission slurry spreading methods on the farm, which has helped him contribute more nitrogen from that slurry. And overall, his fertilizer nitrogen has been reduced. It's down there at around 109 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, which is quite positive. If we think about performance then in terms of the farm gate surpluses on the farm, Donald is operating a surplus there of 121 kilograms per hectare. So when I say surplus, that's inputs minus offtakes. And if we look at the national average there of dairy farms, they're up a lot higher at 164. Our target there in green is to be less than 160, and Donald is well comfortably within that range. Again, for phosphorus surplus, Donald has a low phosphorus surplus because he's done the work there. And again, his surplus is coming in about 5 kilograms per hectare, whereas the future target is to be less than 10. So again, comfortably within that one. If we look at nitrogen use efficiency, this is the potential, the potential of the nitrogen that's recovered on the farm. And Donald is operating a use efficiency of about 33%. This will sound low to everybody. However, if we look at the national average of dairy farms, or even the highest 10% in terms of profitability, they're only operating at 25, 26%. So again, they're not recovering as much of the nitrogen maybe as they should. And our future target there is 35% for that one and 70% for phosphorus. And you can see there, Donald is well on his way to doing that. So I suppose Donald's farm is an example of somebody that has adopted things that's well on the way in terms of achieving both the economic, the production and the environmental sustainability indicators. So to summarize, your soils are your most valuable asset on your farm. Measure and manage them. When I say measure, use your soil test results. You have these for your irrigation plans. You have these for your fertilizer plans. Pull them out before spring. Consult with your advisor and make some soil fertility decisions. Apply lime as recommended on the soil test report. You know, the back end has been very good for applying lime, and on a dairy farm where there's a big demand on the grass and the cows are following close, you have to be nimble and you have to be prepared with a lime plan to get the liming operation done, but it will pay dividends. In early spring, match nutrient inputs with grass growth potential. So maybe this year, don't blanket spread every hectare on the farm the same. Carve it up, look at the wetter soils, look at the drier soils, look at the ones with covers, and most importantly, anybody that's measuring grass there, pull out your results from last year and see what grew what on the farm and feed to yield. Target slurry to the fields with the highest P and K value. That's where you're going to get the most maximization of the fertilizer value in that slurry on the index 1 or 2 soils or on the silage field. And lastly then, manage your soils. So you manage your cows, you manage the other operations in your business like your financials, etc. You need to manage your soils the same. It'll improve the environmental and the economic sustainability of your farm for the future. And with that, look, I wish you luck for the year ahead and all the best for 2022. And I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks, David. And look, the questions are coming in. Our suppliers are emailing them into hello@glanbiaconnect.com, but more importantly, they're actually texting them to 086 180 3947. That's 086 180 3947. Jumping straight into the questions, David, and thanks very much for the presentation. You placed a lot of emphasis in your presentation on the whole area of liming and this has been reflected in some of the questions that are coming in. I have two questions maybe I'll put to you around liming first. Considering the price of fertiliser, would it be advisable to spread a ton of lime to the acre just to be on the safe side, as I'm already planning to spread less bag manure next year? That's the first question. And maybe the second question on liming is around lime standards and the type of lime, ground, granular. So could you speak to them two areas there around, look, advisable around getting extra lime out, and then the standards where you're buying lime?
Okay, so in response to the first question, Thomas, it will be critical, I suppose, this year to have lime up. So what I would do is, anybody that has new soil test results, those will be the go-to, I suppose, in terms of where you need lime, looking at that and getting some lime, even if it's as low as a ton to the hectare. Get that out if you can get it out. What I would say to somebody that maybe the soil test results aren't current, but it's a year or two away before you get back in to take the next round of soil samples, I wouldn't go out and just apply lime to be sure. If you have some evidence that those paddocks weren't so high at your last soil test, then a ton or two per hectare is not going to do any harm for sure. However, if you are well up there to the optimum, we don't want to overdo it with lime either. We don't want to drive it above 7 because it can interfere with trace element efficiency. So I'd say, look, if you're in doubt, maybe take an interim soil sample of a few fields that you're concerned about and use that information. But certainly dig out those soil test results and apply any lime that's needed on the farm. In terms of the second question, so lime is regulated like fertilizer is and everything else. There is a lime standard there that the quarries can't sell the lime until it meets the minimum standard. So that's in terms of fineness and its total neutralizing value, or TNV, as you might hear about. So those standards are rigorous and they must be met. So all lime should meet those standards, quarried lime. The difference between bagged lime and quarried lime is essentially down to the fineness. So basically what quarried lime is, if we think about a ton of quarried lime, it's worth the equivalent of about 7 bags of ground lime, plus the remainder 65% is more coarse. And it's more coarse for a reason. So if we think about the first 350 kilograms of the ton, that's equivalent to 7 bags of fine lime. That's ground very, very fine and is very reactive. It'll react within 3 to 6 months once it's washed in. The remaining 60% or 65%, 650 kilograms, works over year 2 and year 3. So it keeps your pH up as more acid comes into the soil. If we think about bagged lime, the bagged lime works, it's all fine, so it'll all work together in that first 3 months, 3 to 6 months, the same as the fine fraction of the quarried lime. However, it won't maintain, it doesn't have the maintenance, the coarser fraction that'll work in year 2 or 3. So what I'd say with that is you need to buy that lime and apply it more regularly in smaller amounts, whereas the quarried lime will work, you apply it in year 1 and it'll work for the 5 years that you want to apply. So it's just a different operation, but both are equally as good. Yeah,
I tell you, I'm getting another a related question somewhat around supplier in a high molybdenum area.
Yeah.
And what's the guidance around soil fertility advice and addressing there?
Okay, so this is a key question, and many farms will be in high molybdenum areas. So what I would say is molybdenum, the issue here is molybdenum antagonizes copper uptake in ruminant animals, so in dairy cows or in sheep. So if we have high molybdenum, we will have less copper uptake and we run into issues in terms of copper deficiency in the animal. So that's the issue. Right, so where does lime come into that? The higher we lime where the soil has molybdenum in it, the higher the potential there is for uptake of molybdenum into the grass. And once the cow eats that high molybdenum grass, then the issues come up. However, what I would say there is, if there's no history of copper deficiency on your farm, then we must apply some lime. We shouldn't just take that we can't apply lime and we're now down at very acid conditions, because it's going to have an effect on your nitrogen use efficiency, your persistence of your swards, etc. So there's two options here in terms of how to approach that. We apply lime, but we apply it more sparingly, so at lower rates, till we edge up the pH up to just between 6 and 6.2, where the molybdenum is not an issue. It's still better than having more acidic soils. The other option there is that we apply lime as per the recommendations, and we supplement the animals with copper. So there's two options there, but what I would say there is, don't use it as a reason not to apply any lime, and therefore your soils are all down in the 5s in terms of pH. That's not a good outcome.
Okay, look, moving on to another question around potentially less nitrogen being allowed to be used on farm. The question is, look, under new regulations, they'll have to use less nitrogen fertilizer, and in the future, how should they be thinking about this in terms of preparing for it and planning for it, David? Okay,
so that's another key question in terms of future. So it's like anything in your business, you need to plan for what's going to come, rather than waiting on it, and I suppose then getting into more of an issue. So it's my understanding that fertilizer levels will be cut under the new nitrates directive. That's what the department have communicated. We'll probably end up with about a 10% cut. However, if we look at what has been muted in terms of climate and other regulation, it would appear that in the future there's going to be calls for higher cuts up to 20%. So what I would say to any farmer then is, we need to be adopting a system or putting things in place to operate in the future, feed our cows, grow grass with less chemical nitrogen. And there's a number of things then to think about in that respect. I suppose clover is one of the biggest things. At least get clover into the paddocks. If it's not oversown as you're reseeding on your round, get clover into those and begin to get used to managing that clover. That's number one. The slurry is a key one. Using low emission slurry spreading to get more nitrogen, we can easily get back 10% nitrogen if that's what we're going to be cut in the new regulations. We can easily live within that by substituting in slurry and getting more from our slurry with low emission slurry spreading. Building soil fertility, I showed you plenty of examples there of how we can get much higher recovery of the fertilizer that we can put in, much higher than 10%. I think in most of those slides or most of those examples, it was 15, 20, 30% more efficient nitrogen use. So again, it's within our grasp, or within farmers' grasp to get this back. And ultimately, in a high price year like this, we can live with less nitrogen, and we probably will have to live with less nitrogen because it mightn't be available in the early spring.
David, you mentioned clover there in your reply. I have a question here on clover and multi-species swards. Okay. What are the soil fertility levels necessary for maintaining clover and multi-species swards?
Okay, a good question, and it is a little bit different, not too much different than ryegrass. So what everybody's been doing to keep the ryegrass right. The two key areas, I suppose, are lime, or pH, and phosphorus. Right, those are the two big ones. So for a legume like clover, it's both in the grass clover species swards and in the multi-species swards. Right, clover is the key component there to reducing the nitrogen input. However, clover will only persist and fix nitrogen for you when the pH is high enough. And when I say a sweet spot for clover in the swards, you're talking about a pH of 6.5 to 6.8. So that little bit higher than the minimum threshold for ryegrass. So that's the first one. We need to be applying lime. Phosphorus is another key ingredient here. Clover loves phosphorus and needs phosphorus for the energy to help the biology to fix the nitrogen. So if I explain that, clover is the host, it's the plant that the biology colonize the nitrogen fixing biology, and if there's not enough energy there in terms of that symbiosis, so basically one is using the other as a host. So the clover is the house, and the biology fills the house or lives in the house. And what the clover gives to the biology is carbon. So it fixes carbon and it needs phosphorus energy to drive that. And then the biology will fix the nitrogen for you from the atmosphere. So in a nutshell, high pH and get your phosphorus indexes up to index 3.
Okay, so you need to be pushing over the 6.3 up towards the 6.5.
Yes, yes.
Look, we have more questions, but I am conscious of time. I'm going to try and get through about 3 maybe here, if I can. You placed a lot of emphasis on suitable soil and growth conditions for going out with particularly, with fertilizers and slurry. Where can farmers find information regarding regarding suitable soil and growth conditions for applying fertilizer in the springtime? And a completely unrelated question is, will farmers get credit for reducing greenhouse gas emissions by liming their soils?
Okay, so we'll deal with the first question in terms of the early spring first. So where can farmers get the information? So certainly in terms of the Met-Éireann and the farming forecast, this information is given out, the soil moisture deficits, etc. So in terms of dryness or wetness is given out in that, and that's a good one to consult. However, for a more focused information, certainly Teagasc will be giving out this information on our website, but also in our Grass 10 newsletter. I know that the Farmers Journal and other media outlets have the grass growth curves published year on year, and also we will have predicted grass growth for the week ahead being given out, and the advice around that from the Teagasc system, and I assume Glanbia also give out that advice as well. So again, if you look at the media, it'll be probably more to the fore this spring because of the situation with fertilizer, etc. That we've endeavoured as an organisation to push out more information, and we would hope then that Glanbia, I'm sure, will, and the other organisations there. So it should be available.
Tell me, David, around getting credit for reducing greenhouse gas emissions by liming?
Yeah, so now that the science is there, this science now is published, and it's available there for the Environment Protection Agency. So the EPA do that monitoring. They will pick this up, and ultimately there, where farmers are doing soil test results, they will get credit going forward, and we would hope that that will happen later in 2022.
Tell me, the role of biostimulants, have you any view on that?
Role of biostimulants, look, they have a role there. However, what I would say is probably 99% of the efficiency can be gained by getting the basics right, get your soil fertility right, feed to yield in terms of your application rates, and then consider biostimulants after that. There's still a lot of work to be done on biostimulants, and not everything out there has the same efficacy. So buyer beware, I'd say, till the science comes out.
And any guidance on where you might get some independent perspective on that?
So we have some work ongoing looking at biostimulants, and I suppose we will have a report. The first report coming out on that probably in April this year. So it's not ready for the spring, I suppose, but we will have some information available for the public later in the year.
Come here, there's a question which I think is related to Donald's case study that you put up, Donald Kavanagh's. On the farm discussed, was there just 109 kgs of chemical nitrogen purchased for the year? And if so, was all the feed grown on the farm?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that all the feed was grown on the farm. Obviously, when you look at the total nitrogen input there, there was about 180 kilograms per hectare in total. And if you bring in slurry on top of that, which we'll bring that up closer to the 200 kilogram mark. But what I suppose the main point there with that is he's less reliant on chemical fertilizer and doing more in terms of other sources of nitrogen fertilizer, including clover on the farm. He's oversowed most of the farm with clover this year.
Okay, David, we could have went on for another 10 minutes, and indeed we're over time, and I'm conscious of that because there's such as the interest. I do just want to at this stage thank you for taking part in the webinar, and also thank those who took the time to join and listen to you. Look, in terms of those that are watching, stay tuned to glanbiaconnect.com, our Twitter account at glanbiaconnect, for the next webinar, where we will look at Borbia's farmer feedback report and the information available in it to improve on-farm sustainability. David, once again, I want to thank you. Today's webinar, as always, will be available on Glanbia Connect's YouTube channel for anyone who wants to look back at the presentation. And finally, thanks for our supporting colleagues of James Brennan, Brian Short, John Warren and Eamon Ryan for helping us make this happen successfully today. Look, thank you very much, and safe farming.